I think that Brian and I, we did well there, but in terms of, if you broke it down to a daily performance at 27 days a month, we earned every cent of it. So, you know, Vince paid us well, but I think the compensation could have been better. Matter of fact, I asked him one time, he told us, he said, I want you to go to Australia for me. Brian and I, the very first trip the WWE went to Australia. And at that time, Brian and I were averaging about $4,500 a week, which was great money. But we were working 7 days a week. So he wanted us to go to Australia for $2,500 a week. So I said, Vince, I said, why would we want to go to Australia for $2,500 when we're making $4,500 a week? So he said to me, Jim, don't worry, the next time you go, I'll make you $5,000. Well, needless to say, we never got booked in Australia again.
You know, to Jim's point about the salaries and the amount of time that people worked in the AWA, a lot of people don't know that at one time Nick Bockwinkel was actually offered a run as the NWA World Champion. This is back in the 1980s. A lot of prestige coming, you know, being the NWA champion. But because of the schedule, Nick figured that he could make better money working for Vern Gagne a couple of times a week and getting the time off, so he turned down the run as the NWA champion. So, I mean, good and bad about Vern over the years, and brings me to my next question for you. The relationship between you and Greg Gagne after all these years, and draw a comparison between that and your relationship with Brian Blair.
Thank you, Jesus. Right. You know what? It's hard to be a son of a living legend. And, you know, a lot of people didn't realize that Greg Gagne had a really tough road to hoe. You know, Greg was very talented. He had great timing in the ring. He was very good at what he did. He had a great concept of wrestling, like his dad. The only problem was that Greg had that same sort of attitude, that edge about him that Vern had, and Vern was one of the only guys that could get away with that. And so consequently, you know, when I was Greg's partner, I made all the small towns, and Greg didn't, but that was okay. I realized that when we first became partners. But a lot of people ask me the difference between Greg Gagne and the Killer Bees with Brian Blair, and it was sort of it was really a totally different situation in being a tag team with Greg and I, because Greg and I had the greatest talent to work with. These guys flopped around with Nick and Ray and Bobby Duncombe and Jack Lanza, and the list goes on and on. I mean, they were the greatest talent to learn from, and they gave of themselves so much on a nightly basis to make the match get over. Whereas in New York, they could give a rat's ass if they had a good match, because they were just going through the motions. So Brian and I had to, we did this little beat gimmick with the mask, which really got over. And the fact that Vince and I never got along from day one, and a lot of people say, well, how come you didn't get along with him? Well, right off the bat, and this is something that a lot of people don't know, but when I was in the AWA, Greg Gagne, I was going to leave. Greg Gagne signed my name on a contract with LGN, and it produced the High Flyer dolls. So when I get to New York, they're going to have a Killer Bee doll, and all of a sudden Vince McMahon comes up to me and he says, what are these LGN High Flyer dolls doing here? And I said, I don't know. Well, what had happened was Greg got upfront money of $12,500, and he signed my name, and I was supposed to get the $12,500. So the money went to Vince. So and Vince said that's his money because I had signed a contract with the WWE. So I sued Vince for that money, and I won. So in the first 2 weeks or 3 weeks, that's why there was many other reasons that Vince and I didn't get along, but I think that I'll never forget my first interview with Gibson, you know, a babyface interview. So Vince is standing maybe 25 feet away, and I got done, and you know, and I walked away, and all of a sudden I heard Vince say, "Jesus Christ, we got another Bob Backlund." So right there, I knew my days might have been numbered, and then at the very end, I told Vince he and I had gone, and I had been asked to do jobs on TV, which I did because I needed the money at that time. So I told Vince, I said, "I got a hell of an idea." And he says, "What's that?" I said, "You come out and confront me in an interview," and I said, "I'll beat the dog shit out of you." And then I said, "We'll go around and I'll let you beat me in every town we go to." And he looked at me and he says, "That'll never happen." So needless to say, I never got booked again. But that was the truth.
And there were rumors, and Jim kind of put them to rest today. When I first saw him, I congratulated him. You know, believe everything you read on the internet, you know, obviously. There was a rumor going around, the Killer Bees are going to be inducted. They're the next inductees into this year's WWE Hall of Fame. So when I saw Jim today, I put my hand up, I said, "Congratulations on the Hall of Fame induction," and he didn't shake my hand, which a lot of people don't, but he didn't shake my hand, and then he told me the story. He says, "My God, that's never going to happen." And he told me about all the heat that you had with Vince McMahon. One thing before we get on to another question about Jim Brunzell. First of all, Jim Brunzell and Greg Gagne. To me, they were as good as any tag team in AWA history. They absolutely tore it up every night, and whatever anybody says about Greg for his size or whatever, he sold his ass off for everybody, and they were as popular a tag team as has ever come down the pipe. So when you talk about the great teams in wrestling, you're right up there. You and Greg, no question about it. You got a question back there?
Well, I was just going to make a comment, you know, when Jimmy referred to Greg always, you know, doing well in the ring and everything. Greg wasn't the biggest wrestler in the world, especially in that era even. But one thing that I think is a testimony to Greg and his ring work was not once, not twice, but many, many times, Nick Bockwinkel told me that anytime he was in the ring with Greg, it was a night off. And that is a compliment for those of you that don't understand that, because that means that the match was good, that the opponent was good, and that Greg was a great guy to work with. And that came from Nicholas Warren Bockwinkel himself. So.
And speaking of Nick, and we'll get on to the other gentleman, you wrestled Nick for the first time that I saw this match. You wrestled Nick to a 60-minute draw.
December 6th, 1975. And 1 year later, in December of 76, 2 one-hour Broadways. Jimmy Brunzell and Nick Bockwinkel.
Well, that's so much for my question. My question was, you know, we talked a little bit months ago, you and I, about this. To me, that was like a coming of age for you, because it was a singles match. It was against Nick. Greg had nothing to do with it. Bobby Heenan, of course, was in the corner. But there was everything you would ever want in one match. Outside interference and near falls and what have you. Do you remember that contest and what it meant as far as your career was concerned?
No, you don't.
I do, and I don't want to monopolize this any more than I have already, but Nick Bockwinkel was probably the greatest technician I ever worked with in the ring, because he was totally mentally and physically involved in every minute in that match. And he also had the greatest personality in Bobby Heenan ever in normal day history of wrestling. He was the greatest all-around character there was, Bobby Heenan. But Nick had a way of building a match around wrestling, and then no matter what happened, he always made the baby face outdo him, so he had to violate a rule, and it could have been easy, you know, something real easy like poking him in the eye, pulling his tights. But Nick was the ultimate performer. And I remember in St. Paul, I was nervous as hell because I was going to do an hour draw with Nick in my hometown, really, and I was young, you know, I don't know, I was probably 24 or 25 years old. So we go in the ring and we're having a hell of a match, and it's time for me to make a comeback. So, and there's about a minute left maybe, and I'm huffing and puffing, and I'm making a comeback, and all of a sudden out of clear blue sky, Nick hits me in the solar plexus. By accident, it takes all the wind out of me, and I just sort of went down to about 5'6". And then he started yelling at me. He said, "Come on, Jim, come on, fire!" You know, and I could barely. And the match got over with, and I was so goddamn glad to get in that locker room so I could take a deep breath. You know, I was posing that I was okay, but I collapsed into a puddle. But Nick was, without a doubt, I had an opportunity to wrestle Ric Flair for our Broadways, and I wrestled Harley Race and Jimmy Snuka, but Nick Bockwinkel was absolutely the greatest. Yeah. He gave so much of himself, and he was such a asset for pro wrestling. It was unbelievable.